Said that hacking a WordPress site requires you to have access to a login username and password, specifically of the administrator. Today, we're going to show that hacking a WordPress site can also be achieved by exploiting a vulnerable plugin. As you know, WordPress is a huge ecosystem of plugins. It actually lives on plugins. Without plugins, you cannot operate a WordPress website these days. So let's get started. You can always rely on the proper hacking tools to hack WordPress websites, or maybe do penetration testing as well. So you see, we use the WPScan and we specify the target URL. In the case of this video, the target URL represents a machine from TryHackMe. The machine's name is Smol. And then we specify the right switches -- enumerate AP and U. AP for enumerating all the plugins and U for the users. Since we are still convinced that old habits die hard, that's why I enumerated the users, because somehow at some point you might need to brute force one of them and obtain the password. But we also obtained the list of all the plugins. And you see the tool fantastically is able to enumerate all the plugins in use by the current WordPress installation. Among them is the plugin that we're going to mess with today in this video, which is JSmol2 WP. And what matters when enumerating plugins is the version of the plugin. The version is 1.07. Now, the job here is to find out if this plugin is vulnerable, namely the version is old enough to have an active exploit. And when I googled the plugin, I only found this page, which looks like the main page of the plugin. This WordPress plugin is based on the Smol molecular graphics viewer from Bob Hansen, and the list of the authors goes on. And when I googled the plugin again, I found that it is vulnerable to every version less than or equal to 1.07, which is the stated version here in the WordPress scan. Every version that satisfies this condition is vulnerable to a compound of vulnerabilities: directory traversal, local file inclusion, and ending with server-side request forgery. So in the JSmol2 WP plugin, there is an SSRF vulnerability, and that's the proof of concept. Now, despite that we don't have access to the source code to fully analyze the scope of this vulnerability, we're given this proof of concept. Now, before we blindly take this proof of concept and run it against the target, let's first have a look at the components and how it works. Alright, so the first part of the proof of concept, we have the URL path to the plugin file, okay, the target plugin file. It is the JSmol.php, and up to this point everything looks normal. It's a call to the PHP script here. And then we have the query parameters. The first parameter here we have is the isForm, and it is assigned the value true. So here it looks like the proof of concept tries to make the request as it comes from a form submission, where the user selected or where there is submitted the form. When the user submits the form, the isForm query parameter here value becomes true. Okay, so now the file will take this as a form submission. The user submits a form, and then we have another query parameter which is call. The query parameter call is assigned the value get raw data from database, and the look of this value indicates that it might be a call to a function that is mentioned somewhere inside the JSmol PHP script. So that function now is controlled and can be called using the call parameter. So now we have a form submission, and then we have a call to the get raw data from database. Up to this point, also it looks completely normal to have this request when you are interacting with a plugin on the WordPress. And lastly, we have the query parameter. Okay, now we see the query parameter is assigned the value or uses the PHP stream wrapper filter. Now this PHP stream wrapper, which is a filter, allows you to encode and decode files. Now the problem with using this wrapper is that everything that comes after the wrapper, meaning in our case here, it is /resource, and then we have a directory traversal navigation to the wp-config. Everything that comes after the filter is treated as a resource to be processed by the filter. Somehow, maybe using encoding, base64 encoding and decoding. Although it's not mentioned here that the resource will be encoded, still the use of this wrapper treats everything that comes after it not as a file to be processed, as a resource to be processed, not a file path. That's the thing here. And that's why the PHP filter wrapper most often is used to bypass file restriction mechanisms. Now, what comes after that is a directory traversal. So it navigates out of the current directory to access the wp-config. So here we have a directory traversal and file inclusion vulnerability as well. So first SSRF, and then local file inclusion and directory traversal. Now the thing is here, the wp-config file is not supposed to be accessed by the outside world. So it can be accessed maybe by the owner of the file, but it should not be accessed by the outside world through a regular request from the web server. That's why here also there could be permissions problem in the wp-config file. It should be revisited. That's the complete analysis of the exploit. Now what could be done to prevent this is first to set the proper permissions of wp-config, making the file accessible only to the you have the owner of the file, and read access cannot be obtained by the local web server. And we have the PHP filter. If not needed, it also should be disabled. And every file that's called or accessed by the web server, it should not be passed directly to parameters, right, before validation or input validation. Right, now, if we take this and execute this on the web server, we should be able to read the contents of the wp-config file. Now when we enter the URL, we can see we now have access to the wp-config file. And the wp-config file is not just a regular number file. It contains a lot of sensitive information about the configuration of a WordPress site, including the username of the database and the password. With the users and the password we got access to, now we can log into the WordPress. Okay, once we log into WordPress, we notice something missing from here. I cannot see the plugins. Anyhow, if we go to pages, and from here we notice that there is a page named Webmaster Tasks. If we click on Edit, because we want to know the full path to this page, you can just click on this arrow here on the right, View Page, and this will allow us to view the page. So on the task list, the very noticeable one is this one. Check backdoors, verify the source code of Hello Dolly plugin as the site's code version. But remember, we cannot access the plugins from here. So the only way to access the plugins or the source code of this plugin is through the SSR vulnerability we saw earlier. So we're going to go back to the proof of concept of the exploit here and modify it a little bit. Here, instead of the wp-config, we're going to say hello.php, which is the official file for the plugin. We plug this in, and it says refuse to connect, of course, because we didn't modify the path or the IP. So now it points to the right server. It did not work apparently because there is a problem in the URL. So we see there is something missing. The path to the plugin is missing. So we can go back and put this path. So here plugins/hello. Now this makes it correct. Going back, and yet we still have the URL. Let's try removing one navigation. Try now, and now it works. All right, now we have this version of Hello Dolly. So we're tasked to review this version as per instructed in the task page. Okay, so this is the meta information about the plugin. And we have the first function, Hello Dolly, get the lyrics. It doesn't look suspicious. Now we have the lyrics, and then we have a couple of comments, and then we have another comment, and we have eval function. Now usually eval is not used like that in Hello plugin. How do we know that? We compare it to the original version of the Hello plugin. So we check out Hello plugin, WordPress, and maybe we use GitHub as a reference. We click on Hello World, and we search for the eval function. We don't see any line that mentions the eval function. So we now know that this line was inserted intentionally. Okay, as you can see, there's a base64 string. You're gonna have to decode this to understand what it does. So echo, the echo command, we can just do this. And now we see this. Okay, let's have this over here. So what is that? This is looks to me a PHP one-liner, but we have some non-ASCII representations here. So this is octal representation, and this is hexadecimal representation. Now basically, this corresponds to the C letter on the alphabet. This corresponds to M, and x64 corresponds to D. Okay. Now you can just take this and maybe use some decoding. So here from octal to ASCII. Let's say 143. So we see 143 equals to C. Okay, and let's see 155. It is M, And let's see x64. Now x64 is not actually octal, so it is hexadecimal. So convert from hex to ASCII, it is D. So if we go back now, we construct the full word, it becomes like this. So let's have it decoded manually here. So now this becomes CMD, right? And we saw that 143 equals to C, so now this becomes C as well. And then we have 6D, and then we have 144. So 6D in hex corresponds to M. So this is CM, and 144, and this actually is an octal. We're gonna have to go to octal. And this is D. So it becomes CMD. So that's one-liner, okay, PHP one-liner to probably execute system commands through the CMD parameter. And now we're gonna take advantage of this. But how are we gonna do that? We're gonna go back to the full URL we saw earlier, that we used earlier. This one. But this one was not going to work in our case here because this one is useful only to view sensitive files, to perform SSRF and local file inclusion. What if you want to execute system commands through a CMD parameter? We're going to have to construct a new proof of concept URL, and that's actually simple. So we're going to grab the URL here. Can modify this later. So maybe this /wp admin index, and then we use CMD like that. Okay. Now after CMD, we can use any type of reverse shell. What worked for me is the Netcat reverse shell. Okay, let's grab one from here. Let's see here. Pre-compromised Netcat one-liner. Okay, let's have this over here to Notepad. And here we're going to need to modify the URL. So if config, this is my URL, this is my IP. Modifying now the IP. And also the port 4547, it can't stay the same. Now this should be encoded into a URL format because we can do this here, right? So this one should be encoded. So I'm gonna copy this and use online URL encoding. Let's have this over here like that. Going to encode, and that's the encoded format. I'm gonna copy this and paste it here. Right, having the payload ready, don't forget we're gonna have to change the URL. Okay, now we go back, and this here should be listening on port 4547. On a new tab or the same tab, doesn't matter. I'm going to execute this. And now we received the reverse shell. So we turned SSRF local file inclusion and a bit of enumeration into a complete shell on the target machine. Moving on, we know from before that we have a couple of credentials. Among them is the WP user and its password. So we're going to use this to access the database. So MySQL -u WP user -p. And now the password. We should have noted the password here, but anyway, I'm gonna re-grab the password. Okay, let's modify this because we don't want to modify this every time. And this is the password. Apparently we had problems with the previous session, so now I'm going to use a Python TTY to make the shell more stabilized. And then we log in MySQL -u WP user -p. And now the password is the password we saw earlier from the wp-config. Now we log into the MySQL server. The first thing we want to do is to check out the user's database. So maybe we can extract the login password from the wp_users. So select user, let's say, shall we extract everything or should just we learn about the database first? So let's use asterisk extract everything from the table wp_users, from wp_users. No database selected, show databases. So we have WordPress, use WordPress. Now we re-execute the previous MySQL statement. So now this is the WP users table, and we see there are several columns: the user login, user pass, email, URL, and where it was registered, and the activation key. What matters to us is the hashes. So we're going to extract the logins and the user pass. Select user underscore login, user underscore pass from WP users. So now it is more neat actually. We're going to copy all of this and put it in a hash file. Gonna copy the admin. So say now it's admin, and then this is the hash. The WP user hash, we already have the plain text password, so we're going to skip this. And I'm not sure if I should copy the other users, but it's not wrong to try with these as well. So we're going to copy this. Think. If we copy all of them like that, and maybe open the file. You're gonna have to do just clean up on this. So that's the admin. That's the WP user. And we're gonna have also to sort these as well. Okay, save this, and now we're going to use John the Ripper or GTR to have the plain text form of these passwords. So now John hash.text -- word list, and it's going to be user share word lists rock you. Let's give this some time till all the hashes are cracked. Now with one of the passwords revealed, we can now switch to Diego. So we're going to have Diego over here, exit from the MySQL server, sudo Diego, enter the password, and now we are given access to Diego. So now you can maybe explore the system further. You can maybe upload lin piece, and later down the road you'll find that there are SSH keys that you can download and access, specifically of the user think. So cd home and ls, you see we have the users we saw earlier. If we cd to think, and actually shouldn't be supposed to access the think directory, use that user because privileges should be separated. But anyway, ls, and now we can see ls-la, maybe we have .ssh, and here we have access to the private key. Now we can copy this private key to the local machine of the attacker. So nc lvp4548, and we can redirect this to id rsa, and then we can go back here. I connect to my machine, have the rsa key sent to the netcat command. Let's see where I can find the IP address. If-config, we need the IP address of the attacker machine, along with the port that I'm using to listen for incoming connections, which happens to be 4548. And now we send this private key like this. NC permission denied, so we're not allowed to use NC on this machine. So we're gonna have to copy this IDRSA another way. We can copy this IDRSA into the directory of the WordPress. So maybe let's go back, or we can just use Python 3-m web server at this directory. Will this work? And now we can retrieve the server or the file from here. So we're gonna go back here, copy this, specify the port 8000, and then ID RSA, and now we have downloaded the private key. Okay, let's go back and try to log in. So from here, let's remove this, cd back, cd downloads, and that's my ID, or that's the private key. Let's give it the proper permissions, 600. for the private key or the SSH private key, SSH-I IDRSA, and then we specify the username, which happens to be think at maybe we copy the URL or the IP from here. Let's try to log in. I'm going to say yes. And now we logged into the user think. So now we have access to two users, the user Diego and the user think. Now we want to escalate the privileges ultimately to the root directory or to the root user. Okay, let's go back now to cd home. All right, let's go back to THM again. You see what's the user flag, but we have to know which user THM is suggesting we should bring the flag. So hint, one plugin gives you LFI, another one RCE. Okay, let's search for the flag here. So maybe find dot dash type f dash name, maybe contains the word flag like that. So there is no flag. Let's rewrite the command and maybe use the name like this. So dot text, search for all text files. So we have one user, one text file under Diego. So the flag is under Diego's account. So cd or maybe cat user, and that should give us the flag for the user. Now we have the root flag. Now remember that since we found most of the privileges revealed plainly in the users directories, so mainly we found we escalated to think by grabbing its IDRSA. So maybe now if we check out GG here, you see there is a file named wordpress.old, which is a zip file. We can copy this over to my local machine. And now python-m and use port 8002. And now it works, so now we can download the file. We have the zip file. Let's try to unzip the file. And it requires a password. It's fine. We can crack this password using John the Ripper. So zip to John wordpress.old.zip, and we send this to let's say John. And now we have the new file John. So now we can use John the Ripper -w equal or dash word list. And the file name is jaunt. Okay, this is the password, and it is in the form of an email address, hero_gg@hotmail. Okay, next I'm gonna unzip the file again, and given the password, supply the password to the guy, and see this. Okay, what do we have here? Replace, yes, no, let's say none. It is a WordPress installation file. Let's cd here, and we know when we are navigating a WordPress backup, WordPress dump, the first thing we're gonna check out is the config file, because it contains database credentials. This time we have credentials for the user K. So Chavy, and this is the password. Okay, su Chavy, and the password is given, and now we are user Chavy. So sudo -l. You can see that Chavy can run all commands, okay, without the need to supply the password, which means if we su root or sudo su, let's type sudo su, we are the root user. So cat root.text, and that's the flag. And that was it.